BookTube, I'm Vanessa, and today I get to talk to you about one of my favorite movies ever, Crimson Peak.
Ghosts are real. This much I know.
Okay, so if you're unfamiliar, Crimson Peak is a film that came out in 2015, and it's kind of a Victorian haunted house type story, and it's inspired by a lot of Victorian literature. So I think that's something cool for us bookish people to really appreciate in it. It's from the director Guillermo del Toro, who is an amazing director. He also did Pan's Labyrinth and Pacific Rim, and I just really love him, and I think his imagery and his stories are always so beautiful, and Crimson Peak I think is an absolute masterpiece from him. Unfortunately, it also gets kind of misunderstood and underappreciated, which makes me sad. And a couple videos ago, someone left me a comment saying that they wanted to give it another chance and they knew I was a huge fan, so they asked if I could make a video explaining why I thought the movie was so good. And girl, you have first of all made my entire week, my entire life, and second of all, you've definitely come to the right place because I am so prepared to make this video. I actually did a term paper on Crimson Peak for one of my film classes. I've got a 6-page essay, I've got a PowerPoint presentation, I've got film clips, I've got behind the scenes interviews with the cast and crew. Like, I am ready to go, and I've spent the last week preparing. I have a whole script written for this video so that I can stay organized and try and move through this quickly because there is a lot to cover, but I think it's going to be a fun video, and I hope that it'll be informative and helpful and maybe, you know, help promote some understanding and appreciation for what I think is a very creative and beautifully made film. Before I start, I do need to address the nature of spoilers in this video because obviously I am going to be talking about the plot and showing some movie clips. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail as far as the plot, but you know, when you're talking about plot, it's spoilery anyway. However, I do feel like Crimson Peak is a film where spoilers aren't really a black and white issue, so I'm going to leave that up to you because on the one hand, it does have kind of this like mystery story element to it, which obviously lends itself to not wanting spoilers. But on the other hand, I feel like this whole focus on the like scary mystery story is actually the reason why a lot of people leave Crimson Peak not feeling satisfied, because in my opinion that was never meant to be the focus of the film. So like I said, I will leave that up to you however you want to go into this film and experience this story. This video is going to be here for you whenever you're ready for it, so you do whatever you think is best for you. But if everybody else is chill with what's going on spoiler-wise here, then I'm going to go ahead and get started on all of the reasons why I love Crimson Peak. Okay, so I'm going to start out with just a very brief synopsis of the film, just in case anyone who has stayed hasn't seen it yet. The film follows our heroine, Edith Cushing, who marries a mysterious and handsome stranger named Thomas Sharp, and then she moves into the home that he shares with his sister, Lucille, which is this really old, kind of dilapidated mansion in the middle of nowhere. And while Edith is there, she discovers that this mansion, Allerdale Hall, is haunted, and the ghosts that she encounters kind of guide her along this path of discovery as she starts to uncover some really disturbing secrets about the house and her new husband and her new sister-in-law and these sinister plans that they have in store for her. And as the story progresses, Edith realizes that she is in a very dangerous situation and that she has to find a way out of it. So now that we know the basic gist of the story, I want to talk about what I think is one of the biggest reasons why so many people were disappointed with it, and that comes down to a simple misunderstanding of the genre, which is not the audience's fault, it's the studio's fault, because the studio marketed this film as a horror movie, which it is definitely not. I mean, obviously it does have some horror elements to it with the haunted house and the ghosts and the mystery and all that, but you know, scary movies, they operate under a very specific formula that we're all used to seeing, and that is that they start out under the presumption of innocence. You know, everything seems fine at first, we're just going on a happy camping trip, we're just moving into a nice new house, and then the sinister forces are revealed as the story develops and as suspense is built towards uncovering them. So Crimson Peak kind of does the opposite of all of that, and that is where a lot of the criticism comes from. You know, the sinister forces were really obvious from the beginning, the ghosts weren't really that scary, people felt grossed out more often than they felt actually frightened and scared, and so on and so forth. And all of these things are true. Like, Crimson Peak is a pretty shitty horror movie because Crimson Peak is not a horror movie at all. It has scary movie elements, but it itself is not a scary movie. And the funny thing is that this idea is actually expressed to the audience by the main character herself. She says it in a piece of dialogue within the film that this is not a ghost story. It's a story that has ghosts in it.
A ghost story? Your father didn't tell me it was a ghost story.
Oh, it's not. It's more story with the ghost in it.
Mm-hmm.
The ghost is just a metaphor.
A metaphor?
For the past.
So now if you're like, okay, well if Crimson Peak isn't a scary movie, then what the heck is it supposed to be? This is where the literary connections come in, and this is where stuff starts to get fun, because Crimson Peak is a Gothic romance. Del Toro himself even says that Crimson Peak was more inspired by Victorian literature and artwork than it ever was by anything in the film industry. And I'm sure a lot of us bookish people are at least somewhat familiar with the idea of Gothic romance and Victorian literature and everything. But just in case, a quick overview is this is a dark genre, but it's not meant to be scary. It's meant to touch on themes like rot and decay, the past kind of being a threatening or imprisoning force in people's lives, and the Gothic in general is meant to be disturbing but not scary, if you know what I mean. I actually have a quote here. The quote is, "With the grotesque, reality is distorted into ugly and absurd shapes. It creeps and crawls between repulsion and attraction, the real and the unreal, the humor and the horror." So that's the Gothic, but then there's also the romance part that comes into it, which deals with themes like heroes and freedom and hope. So basically, when we think of Crimson Peak, we can't compare it to Nightmare on Elm Street and The Conjuring. We have to compare it to Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights and The Phantom of the Opera and Edgar Allan Poe, kind of. And actually, two novels that Guillermo del Toro said he was directly inspired by were Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte and Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. And these are where we get the formula for the story of Crimson Peak, because both of these stories deal with a pure-hearted young heroine who finds herself in a kind of a dark and foreboding setting, and there's a dark and mysterious man who she's kind of drawn to, but she also thinks he might be hiding a dark secret. But this is where Del Toro kind of made the genre his own, because in traditional Gothic romance, the dark and terrible secret actually turns out in the end to be a happy ending. You know, the bloody rags the heroine found in the kitchen weren't because the guy's an axe murderer after all. He actually, I don't know, volunteers at a children's hospital or something. And then, you know, they get married and everyone lives happily ever after, the end. But Del Toro wanted to create a Gothic romance story with his own spin on it, where the secret that's discovered really is terrible. And as he says, the horror starts, not ends, with marriage. And he wanted his heroine to find herself in a situation where she actually is in danger and where she has to save herself. And that is what Crimson Peak is all about. So once we have that proper context, I think it becomes a lot easier to appreciate what a beautiful and creative and brilliant job Guillermo del Toro did on this film. So I hope that I've provided some clarity as far as that goes, and now I want to get into the reasons why I felt that this film is so well done, which is, in a nutshell, the way the themes and the motifs of that very creative story are portrayed across every aspect of this film, from the aesthetic to the lighting to the costuming to the set design. Everything that went into this film was done with so much love and so much attention to detail in order to bring a very specific vision to life. And every time I watch it, I notice something new and my mind is just blown every time. So first of all, I want to talk about the imagery of this film, because as I said, the story was inspired by Victorian literature and the visual aesthetic of the film was actually inspired by Victorian artwork. One of Del Toro's biggest influences here was a painter named John Atkinson Grimshaw, and when you look at his paintings, you can definitely see the aesthetic that's going on here, and especially when you put his paintings side by side with scenes from the movie, you can see, for example, here on the left we have a Grimshaw painting and on the right we have a movie still. And again here with this one you can really see it, and again here. And even with the promotional images for the film, you can really see the consistency with this visual aesthetic, and I just really appreciated that. Another thing that I love that is portrayed very visually throughout this film is there's this recurring theme and motif of this metaphor of butterflies and moths, where we have our heroine Edith as the butterfly who's bright and full of life, and then we have Lucille, who is the dark and hungry moth that wants to consume. There's even a scene in the film where Lucille is telling Edith about how at Allerdale Hall, where she lives, there are moths that literally feed off of eating butterflies.
At home, we have only black moths. Formidable creatures, to be sure, but they lack beauty. They thrive on the dark and the cold.
What do they feed on?
Butterflies, I'm afraid.
This is obviously a metaphor for the story as a whole, and it is consistently portrayed visually throughout the film through, first of all, the amazing costume design by Kate Hawley, where we have Edith always being dressed in these very smooth, very brightly colored, very open dresses that are usually adorned with flowers. And as you can see, they have these big sleeves like butterfly wings. A lot of scenes after her arrival at Allerdale feature this nightgown, which as you can see is made of a very crisp, like see-through gauze material, and the scenes are almost always set up to where the light is illuminating that material from behind, and it's meant to be reminiscent of like a chrysalis or a cocoon, you know, what the caterpillar goes into before it becomes a butterfly, because that's what Edith as a character is going through in the story. You know, she comes to Allerdale as a very young and naive and innocent girl, but by finding herself trapped in this situation and having to find her own way out of it, she's going through a metamorphosis, and she's going to come out the other side a new, fully developed person, stronger and better than she was before.
Is it a butterfly?
No. But it will be soon.
And then we have Lucille, the moth, and as you can see, her clothes are usually very dark and they're very texturized with lace or velvet, almost like a moth's fur. And you can see in the middle picture, she's not adorned with flowers, she's adorned with brown leaves. They look like they're rotting, they're dead. Another thing that you'll notice is that they're more stiff and tight-fitting than Edith's dresses are, because Lucille's not free. I mentioned that one of the themes in Gothic stories is the idea of the past imprisoning people, and that is very much who Lucille is. And these clothes that belonged to her mother, they belonged to her past, are very restrictive looking because that's what her past is to her. Just like Edith said about the ghosts being a metaphor for the past, so is Lucille's costuming. And it's that kind of care and thoughtfulness that goes into all of these details that really makes Crimson Peak such an incredible film. Another really cool visual motif that we see throughout the film that I personally find really incredible is having to do with the lighting. There's a recurring theme throughout the film that connects Edith's ability to see ghosts with the colors red and green. And this idea is set up for us in a scene where Edith's friend Alan, who is an eye doctor and a ghost enthusiast, is telling her about ghost photography and some of the ways in which the unseen can become seen. I'm going to show a clip and just pay attention to the connection that he sets up for us with the colors green and red.
Or a person that is no longer living.
But not everyone can see them.
The man that just left, amongst other ailments, is colorblind. Now that man will never perceive the colors red or green. He only accepts their existence because the majority around him does.
He mentions that someone who's colorblind can't see the colors green or red, but that doesn't mean that they're not there. Just like how Edith can see a part of the world that other people can't see, but that doesn't mean it's not real. And whenever we have a scene where Edith is experiencing something supernatural, you can see this really prominent green and red lighting. And it's not subtle, it doesn't look natural, it is very obvious that this is an intentional visual cue to signify the fact that this is a part of the story where we are dealing with a hidden layer of reality. This also even applies to a scene where Edith's father is recognizing the sinister intentions of Thomas and Lucille. He is seeing something that other people aren't able to see, and because of that, the scene is lit with green and red lighting. And we also have the promotional images for the film, which are a blue and red theme, which is of course the color of 3D glasses. And when we're talking about 3D glasses, we're talking about something that enables people to see another layer, another dimension to the world, which is exactly what this story is about. Just like with the costuming, the lighting in this film takes the themes and motifs that have been established through the story and brings them into the physical world. Another way we see this attention to detail in bringing the story to life is through the set itself. Allerdale Hall, this mansion, it's more than just a setting, it's a character in itself. It's such an important piece of the story, and its importance definitely was not overlooked in set design because they went all out. Apparently, they didn't do this as a room-by-room set the way a lot of movies are filmed. They actually built the entire mansion as a whole in full life size and everything. A lot of the cast and crew said that this is actually one of the largest and most fully realized sets that they have ever worked on. I'm going to show a few more clips of when Edith is first being introduced to Allerdale Hall, and I want you to pay attention to, in the first clip, the way it is visually brought to life by showing the red clay dirt that seeps through the floorboards. It looks like the house is bleeding. And then later, Thomas describes the wind in the hallways as the house breathing. It's very alive. It's very human.
The wood is rotting, and the house is sinking.
What was that?
It's the east wind. When it picks up, the chimneys form a vacuum, and with the windows all shuttered up, the house breathes.
Another part of the set where we see this amazing attention to symbolism and detail is actually that chair that you saw Edith sitting in that clip. This chair obviously, first of all, has the back that kind of looks like a moth's wings, but another amazing thing about it is that the prop master actually built two versions of this chair. There's one version which is a normal sized chair, and whenever Thomas or Lucille sits in it, they use that one so that it just looks like a normal chair, but the other one is very large and very oversized so that when Edith is sitting in this chair, it looks like she's being loomed over, like it's very overwhelming and threatening. So we are again back to the butterfly and the moth metaphor, even in the set design. And it's actually repeated quite often throughout the set design, and things like the wallpaper has this moth-like pattern on it. One of the most intense scenes in the movie, when things are really starting to go down, the hallway that Edith is walking through is just infested with more moths than we've ever seen in any of the other scenes. They're just everywhere. And one of my personal favorites is that if you're paying attention in Lucille's bedroom, you can actually see that Lucille keeps these jars with butterflies inside of them in her room. It's all of these tiny details and the not so tiny details, the lighting, the set, the costuming, they all work together in perfect harmony to bring these motifs to life and to convey a very visual story along with the story that's being told through the dialogue and the narration. I watch this movie and I see a film that was made with so much care and so much love, and so many people worked so hard to bring this beautiful story to life. This story about a woman finding her own strength and her own truth, and Del Toro created this story to put a twist on a literary genre and then produce it as a film, and it's just so creative and unique. So I really hope that this video helped to provide some context or a new perspective, or even just some cool background information for anyone that is interested in this film, or anyone that has watched it and maybe didn't really connect to it. I really hope that I've done a good job of explaining some of the amazing things that there are to appreciate about this film. And like I said, every time I watch it, I notice something new. Maybe you will too. I would love to know in the comments if you have any feelings about Crimson Peak, or if you have any thoughts on any of the things that I mentioned. I would just love to have like further discussion with you, so please feel free to chat with me in the comments, and I really hope that I get to talk to you soon. Bye!